What made the 1980s the golden age of toys? From cuddly companions to high-tech heroes, this decade unleashed some of the most iconic, game-changing toys of all time. Stick around as we dive into the wild, colorful world of 1980s toys. You might just spot the one that ruled your childhood. Trivial Pursuit. Let's take a trip back to 1981, a year when a board game about knowing stuff suddenly became the coolest thing on the coffee table. That game? Trivial Pursuit. It actually got its start a couple years earlier, in 1979, when two Canadian journalists, Chris Haney, a photo editor at the Gazette, and Scott Abbott, a sports editor at the Canadian Press, dreamed it up during a friendly hangout. They wanted something fun and challenging that would put people's general knowledge to the test. And they nailed it. Trivial Pursuit is simple in concept, but brilliant in execution. Players move their pieces around a circular board, landing on colored spaces that each represent a different category. Think history, science and nature, arts and literature, sports, entertainment and geography. Answer a question right, you earn a colored wedge. Collect all 6, one from each category, and head to the center for a final challenge. Get it right, and you win. But what really made Trivial Pursuit stand out was how it brought people together. Families, friends, even co-workers gathered to play. Over the years, it's evolved into dozens of themed editions, Star Wars, 80s nostalgia, even junior versions for kids. With translations in over 20 languages, it became a global sensation. And today, it's still a classic go-to for game night. Cabbage Patch Kids. In 1982, a new kind of doll took the toy world by storm, and no one saw it coming. Cabbage Patch Kids, with their soft cloth bodies, rounded plastic faces, and chubby cheeks, became more than just toys. They became a full-blown cultural phenomenon. Originally created by Coleco Industries, each doll came with its own unique name, birth certificate, and set of adoption papers, making every child feel like they were adopting a real baby, not just buying a toy. These weren't your typical dolls. No two were exactly alike, and that only added to the obsession. The demand was so overwhelming that it sparked chaos during the holiday season. Parents were fighting in stores, climbing over each other, just to grab one off the shelves, especially during Black Friday. The frenzy was so intense that Coleco actually had to pause advertising for a while because they simply couldn't produce enough dolls to meet the skyrocketing demand. For 3 straight years, Cabbage Patch Kids smashed toy industry sales records. They were the must-have item of the 1980s. Ironically, despite the wild success, Coleco eventually went bankrupt, and the dolls changed hands several times, eventually landing with Wicked Cool Toys, who still produces them today. Power Wheels. If you were a kid in the 80s or 90s, having your own set of wheels wasn't just a dream. It was a Power Wheels reality. These battery-powered ride-on cars gave children under 7 the thrill of driving, all from the safety of the driveway or backyard. The story begins in 1984, when Kransco, a San Francisco-based toy company, bought Pines of America, an early maker of battery-powered kids' vehicles. Just 2 years later, the line got a new name and a bold identity: Power Wheels. What made Power Wheels such a hit wasn't just that they moved, it was how real they felt. These weren't basic plastic scooters. They looked like mini versions of real-life cars and trucks. Some models even came with features like working FM radios, CB radios, opening doors and hoods, and both forward and reverse gears. Kids could cruise like grown-ups, just in slow motion. By 1990, Power Wheels had hit their stride, with sales topping 1 million units per year, and they haven't slowed down since. Over the decades, the brand has kept up with trends, offering new models based on popular vehicles and characters. Today, they're still a staple for little ones who dream of hitting the road. Gloworm. Back in 1982, bedtime for little ones got a whole lot cozier thanks to a snuggly little toy called Gloworm. Made by Hasbro's Playskool division, Gloworm wasn't just another plush doll, it had a magical twist. When kids gave it a gentle squeeze, its soft plastic face would light up with a warm, comforting glow. And for many young children, that soft light made bedtime feel a little less scary and a lot more comforting. The design was simple, but genius. Shaped like a cute worm in a cozy sleeper outfit, Gloworm quickly became a nighttime companion for kids everywhere. It wasn't just a toy, it was a source of comfort during the dark, quiet hours of the night. Parents loved it too, since it helped soothe fussy kids without the need for bright lights or extra attention. Thanks to its success, Hasbro expanded the Gloworm line beyond just the basic glowing plush. Soon, there were musical glowworms that played lullabies, as well as a whole collection of bedtime storybooks, sing-along videos, and other merchandise featuring the lovable character. My Little Pony. In 1982, Hasbro introduced a magical world filled with color, imagination, and charm. My Little Pony. These adorable little ponies weren't just toys, they were little characters full of personality and sparkle. But before the My Little Pony line trotted onto toy shelves, there was a lesser-known predecessor called My Pretty Pony, released in 1981. It was bigger, more realistic, and not quite the hit Hasbro was hoping for. So, they went back to the drawing board and came up with something smaller, cuter, and far more enchanting. What set My Little Pony apart were the bright pastel-colored bodies, the silky brushable manes and tails, and the signature cutie marks on their flanks, unique symbols that hinted at each pony's special trait or story. They weren't just fun to play with, they sparked creativity and storytelling in young kids, especially little girls. Thanks to its early success, My Little Pony quickly grew into more than just a toy line. There were animated specials, TV shows, movies, books, clothes, you name it. Over the years, the franchise reinvented itself through different generations, each with a fresh look and new characters to connect with a new audience. But through every version, the heart of My Little Pony has remained the same: friendship, magic, and fun. Which 1980s toy was your absolute favorite growing up? And do you still have it? Care Bears. Before they became beloved stuffed animals, the Care Bears actually started out in a very different place, on greeting cards. Back in 1981, the company American Greetings designed these sweet, colorful bears as part of a new line of cards meant to spread love, joy, and caring. But it didn't take long for the characters to leap off the paper and into the arms of children everywhere. By September of 1982, Parker Brothers introduced them as plush toys, and just a few months later, in the spring of 1983, Kenner took over and launched them into full-blown toy stardom. Each bear had its own color and personality, marked by a unique symbol called a belly badge right on its tummy. Whether it was Tenderheart Bear, Cheer Bear, or Grumpy Bear, each one stood for a specific emotion or value, making it easy for kids to connect with the one that matched their own feelings. Care Bears weren't just toys, they were part of a movement. They starred in animated TV specials, movies, books, and even video games. From 1983 to 1987, over 40 million Care Bears were sold. And even decades later, they're still around, thanks to multiple reboots and generations. Many moms today proudly pass down their childhood Care Bears to their daughters, continuing the caring tradition across generations. Masters of the Universe. Back in the early 80s, when kids were obsessed with heroes, villains, and epic battles, Masters of the Universe hit toy shelves and changed the action figure game forever. Created by Mattel in 1981 and launched in 1982, this sword and sorcery-inspired toy line was bold, imaginative, and packed with muscle. While the exact origin story is a bit murky, since several designers have claimed credit, it's clear that Mattel struck gold. Unlike the smaller Star Wars figures from Kenner, which stood about 3 3/4 inches tall, Mattel made a bold move with bulkier 5.5-inch characters. They were bigger, buffer, and ready for battle. At the center of it all were two unforgettable figures: He-Man, the most powerful man in the universe, and Skeletor, his evil arch-nemesis. But they didn't come alone. A whole universe of heroes, villains, monsters, and machines filled out the lineup. What made this toy line even more unique? Each figure came with its own mini comic book, adding layers of backstory and sparking kids' imaginations. Soon enough, DC Comics joined in, followed by the famous animated TV series and even a live-action movie in the late 80s. Although there was a reboot in the early 2000s, it never quite recaptured the lightning-in-a-bottle magic of the original 1980s run. Still, Masters of the Universe remains one of the most iconic toy lines of that decade. Stompers. Back in 1980, toy shelves got a jolt of rugged excitement with the arrival of Stompers, tiny but mighty battery-powered 4x4 vehicles that captured the imagination of kids across America. Created by W. Eddie Goldfarb and sold by Shaper Toys, these little trucks packed big fun into a small package. Each one ran on a single AA battery and could roll across all kinds of terrain, from carpet to dirt to backyard trails. Over in the UK, they were sold as Trekkers by Corgi Toys, but the thrill was exactly the same. The original lineup featured some classic American rides: the Chevy K10 Scottsdale, Chevy Blazer, Dodge Warlock, Ford Bronco, and Jeep Honcho. These weren't just toy cars, they were mini off-road machines. As the craze grew, more vehicle models were added, along with stunt sets and accessories. Foam tires made for better traction, and later versions even came with 2-speed settings and a neutral gear, so kids could play with them manually if the battery died. Their popularity wasn't just about the toys themselves, it was also about timing. The early 80s saw a massive rise in the monster truck scene, especially with the emergence of Bigfoot. Stompers gave kids a way to bring that high-octane, off-road energy into their own hands. For a while, nothing was cooler than a Stomper climbing over the couch cushions like it was crushing cars in an arena. Pound Puppies. In 1984, a new kind of cuddly companion hit the toy scene: Pound Puppies. Created by Mike Bowling and first sold by Irwin Toys in Toronto, these plush pups quickly captured the hearts of children everywhere. What made them so special? Each Pound Puppy came with its own adoption certificate, giving kids the joy of rescuing a dog and giving it a forever home. That emotional connection was a big part of the magic. Soon after their Canadian debut, the toy line was picked up by Tonka and brought to the US, where it exploded in popularity. By 1985, a TV special had aired, and the following year, an animated series launched, turning these floppy-eared pups into full-blown stars. The franchise kept growing, with a full-length movie released in 1988 and tons of merchandise flooding store shelves. Everything from little golden books and coloring books to t-shirts and school folders. Fast food chains got in on the action too. In 1987, both Hardee's and Pizza Hut offered mini Pound Puppies with kids' meals, making them even more accessible and collectible. The original line stayed strong through the 90s before being discontinued in 2002. Though they were reintroduced in 2014, nothing quite matched the craze of the 1980s. Koosh Ball. In 1987, a new kind of toy hit the scene. Simple, strange, and seriously fun. It was called the Koosh Ball, and it didn't look like any toy kids had seen before. Invented and patented by Scott H. Stillinger, the Koosh Ball was made up of roughly 2,000 soft rubber filaments that radiated from a flexible core. The result? A squishy, colorful ball that was easy to catch, hard to put down, and oddly satisfying to squeeze and toss. The Koosh Ball wasn't just designed for fun, it had a purpose. Stillinger actually came up with the idea while trying to teach his kids how to catch. Unlike hard rubber or plastic balls that could sting or bounce away, Koosh balls were gentle, slow-moving, and perfect for little hands. They quickly caught on, especially because they came in every color imaginable. Kids, teens, even adults loved the sensory feel and playful bounce. As the popularity grew, the Koosh brand expanded into keychains, yo-yos, and even sporty sets like Koosh Baseball and Koosh Tennis. Originally made by Odds On Products, Inc., the toy was later picked up by Hasbro, where it continued to thrive. The Koosh Ball didn't need batteries, flashing lights, or sound effects to be a hit. All it took was a handful of soft rubber strings, and suddenly you had a toy sensation. What was the very first toy you remember begging your parents for in the 80s? Rainbow Brite. In 1983, Hallmark Cards stepped into the world of children's entertainment with a bold splash of color and kindness, introducing Rainbow Brite. More than just a character, she became the heart of a magical media franchise built around themes of friendship, courage, and, of course, rainbows. A year later, in 1984, Rainbow Brite burst onto television screens with her own animated series. That same year, Hallmark teamed up with Mattel to turn the colorful world into a toy line. And just like that, Rainbow Brite became a household name. The story centered around Rainbow Brite, a cheerful girl who brought color to a once dark world with the help of her friends, the Color Kids, and her trusty steed, Starlight. Kids everywhere were drawn to the bright visuals, positive messages, and lovable cast of characters. The dolls, which were released alongside the show, were a big hit. They came dressed in bold outfits, complete with yarn hair, sparkly accessories, and a whole rainbow of collectible pals. In 1985, the franchise even made it to the big screen with Rainbow Brite and the Star Stealer, a full-length animated film. Though attempts to revive Rainbow Brite in 2014 and 2015 didn't quite capture the original magic, for many kids of the 1980s, she was the shining symbol of light, color, and joy. Teddy Ruxpin. Introduced in 1985, Teddy was no ordinary teddy bear. He had moving eyes and a mouth that synced with the words on cassette tapes played from a built-in tape deck in his back. When you popped in a tape, Teddy would read aloud, captivating kids with his gentle voice and expressive face. It was like having your own animated bedtime storyteller right in your lap. Teddy Ruxpin was created by Worlds of Wonder and quickly became a sensation. In fact, he was the best-selling toy in both 1985 and 1986. At the height of his fame, Teddy even landed his own animated television series, taking his magical adventures from the toy shelf to Saturday morning screens. He wasn't just a bear, he was an experience. Though the original cassette-based model is now a nostalgic memory, Teddy has been brought back in modern forms over the years. Today, he's produced by Wicked Cool Toys and has been updated with more modern tech. No more cassette deck. But the heart of Teddy Ruxpin remains the same. Stories, imagination, and that familiar comforting voice that made him one of the most magical toys of the 1980s. Garbage Pail Kids. In 1985, a strange, hilarious, and downright gross set of trading cards hit the scene, and kids couldn't get enough. Garbage Pail Kids, created by the Topps Company, were designed as a rebellious parody of the super popular Cabbage Patch Kids dolls that were taking the toy world by storm. While little girls were busy adopting sweet-faced dolls, boys were showing off their Garbage Pail Kids, grotesque, weird, and brilliantly outrageous. Each card featured a wild cartoon character with some kind of bizarre, exaggerated trait or pun-filled name, like Atom Bomb with his head exploding, or Leaky Lindsay with a waterfall of snot. They were part sticker, part collector's item, and completely irresistible for kids looking to push the envelope a little. They didn't just mock the cuteness of Cabbage Patch Kids, they turned it upside down and made it grotesquely hilarious. But the parody hit a little too close to home. The makers of Cabbage Patch Kids sued Topps for trademark infringement, forcing the company to tweak the design of the characters and logo. By 1988, the fad had faded, and the original series came to a halt. Still, Garbage Pail Kids have never truly gone away. Since 2000, there have been several reboots and new card series, but none have quite recaptured that 80s lightning in a bottle. Micro Machines. In 1987, toy shelves got a whole lot smaller, but way more exciting, thanks to Micro Machines. Released by Gloworm, these tiny toy vehicles packed big fun into just a few inches of plastic. Cars, trucks, planes, boats, you name it, they had it. All designed with incredible detail despite their miniature size. And while the toys were cool on their own, it was the lightning-fast, unforgettable commercials that really turned them into a hit. Enter John Machida Jr., the man who could speak faster than anyone else on the planet. Listed in the Guinness Book of World Records as the fastest talker, Machida became the face and rapid-fire voice of Micro Machines. His mile-a-minute delivery made those ads iconic, and kids everywhere would race to repeat the line. Remember, if it doesn't say Micro Machines, it's not the real thing. That slogan became burned into the memory of a generation. Micro Machines stood out because they were portable, collectible, and surprisingly durable. Kids could carry an entire fleet in their backpack or set up elaborate cityscapes in the living room. Over the years, the brand evolved and changed hands. Gloworm was eventually acquired by Hasbro, but Micro Machines never disappeared completely. GoBots. Before the Transformers became the reigning champions of the robot toy world, there was another mechanical crew revving up kids' imaginations, GoBots. Released by Tonka in 1983, GoBots were part of the early wave of transforming robot toys that took the 80s by storm. They hit shelves a year before Transformers, and for a brief moment had the spotlight all to themselves. GoBots featured robots that could transform into vehicles, planes, and other machines, just like their soon-to-be rival. The toy line was split between two factions, the heroic Guardians and the evil Renegades, locked in an ongoing battle for control. To boost their presence, Hanna-Barbera rolled out an animated series, Challenge of the GoBots, which ran for 65 episodes between 1984 and 1985. The show introduced fans to characters like Leader One and Psykill and gave the toys some much-needed backstory. Initially, the GoBots sold well, but once Hasbro launched Transformers in 1984, with more complex designs, deeper lore, and a bigger marketing push, GoBots started losing ground fast. By 1987, the line faded out. In 1991, Hasbro acquired Tonka, and with it, the rights to GoBots. Transformers. In the 1980s, one toy line didn't just capture kids' attention, it completely transformed it. Transformers were unlike anything else on the shelves. These were action figures that could change shape. One moment they were cool cars, jets, or tanks, and the next, they were fully formed robots ready for battle. It was like getting two toys in one, and that clever design became the foundation of a pop culture phenomenon. Originally created in Japan by Takara Tomy, the toy line made its way to the US thanks to Hasbro, who gave it a bold new identity and story. with catchy slogans like "More Than Meets the Eye" and "Robots in Disguise." Transformers quickly became more than just a toy. They were a full-blown franchise. The characters were divided into two main factions: the heroic Autobots, led by the noble Optimus Prime, and the villainous Decepticons, commanded by the ruthless Megatron. Their battle for control over their home planet, Cybertron, spilled onto Earth and into kids' imaginations. The success of the toys led to an animated TV series, comic books, and even an animated movie in 1986 that left a lasting mark on an entire generation. Fast forward to the 2000s, and Transformers made a massive comeback with blockbuster live-action films and new toy lines. But no matter how advanced they've become, for many fans, the heart and soul of Transformers will always belong to the 80s. Did you ever fight a sibling or friend over a toy like Cabbage Patch Kids or Transformers? Tell us your story. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. In 1984, a quirky comic book launched a phenomenon that would soon sweep across the globe: Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. What started as a small black and white comic created by Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird turned into one of the biggest kids' franchises of the 80s and beyond. The story? 4 ordinary turtles transformed by a mysterious ooze into walking, talking, pizza-loving ninjas. Under the guidance of their wise rat sensei, Splinter, they trained in the art of ninjutsu and took on names inspired by famous Renaissance artists: Leonardo, Donatello, Raphael, and Michelangelo. By 1988, Playmates Toys brought the turtles to life in action figure form, and that's when the real craze began. Fueled by a wildly popular cartoon series, the toys flew off shelves, and soon the turtles were everywhere, on t-shirts, backpacks, lunchboxes, bedsheets, and even underwear. Kids couldn't get enough of them, and the turtle power movement only got stronger going into the early 90s. Although their popularity dipped around 1996, the Turtles made a comeback in 2003 with a rebooted TV series, and again in 2014 with a live-action movie. Over the years, they've continued to evolve with each new generation, but the heart of the franchise remains the same: action, humor, teamwork, and a whole lot of pizza. Nintendo Entertainment System, NES. In the mid-1980s, video games were on life support. After the crash of 1983, many believed home gaming was just a passing fad. But then, in came Nintendo, and everything changed. Originally released in Japan in 1983 as the Famicom, short for Family Computer, Nintendo's 8-bit gaming console quickly became a sensation overseas. By the end of 1984, it was the best-selling console in Japan. In 1985, Nintendo set its sights on the American market, rebranding the system as the Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES. The company smartly launched it in test markets, starting in New York City that October. By 1986, the system was released nationwide with 17 games, including 2 that would define a generation: Super Mario Bros. And Duck Hunt. What made the NES revolutionary wasn't just the games, but how it revived a nearly dead industry. With tighter quality control, engaging gameplay, and an iconic controller design, Nintendo redefined what home gaming could be. Within just a few years, kids everywhere were blowing into cartridges, racing home after school, and begging for extra playtime. Game Boy. In 1989, Nintendo once again changed the game, literally, with the launch of the Game Boy. Released first in Japan in April and then in North America that July, this little gray brick of a console would go on to become one of the most iconic handheld systems of all time. While Europe had to wait over a year to get their hands on it, the Game Boy quickly took the world by storm. At first glance, it wasn't much to look at. The screen was a dull green dot matrix, and there was no color or backlight like some of its flashier competitors. But what it lacked in visual flair, it more than made up for in battery life, durability, and, most importantly, gameplay. Titles like Tetris, Super Mario Land, and Pokémon helped define a generation of gaming, one pocket-sized cartridge at a time. While other companies tried to enter the handheld market with better graphics and color screens, none could match the magic of the Game Boy. Its simplicity, paired with Nintendo's unbeatable library of games, kept it selling strong well into the 1990s. In fact, the Game Boy didn't just survive the decade, it defined it. From long car rides to lazy weekends at home, the Game Boy was always right there in your hands. It wasn't just a handheld console, it was a piece of your childhood. If you lived through the 80s, you know it wasn't just a decade, it felt like another world. From neon signs to giant hairstyles, homes transformed dramatically, leaving behind avocado green kitchens for Hollywood vanity lights and teal carpets. Ready for a nostalgic ride? Let's explore iconic home trends from the decade that dared to be bold. Glass blocks. Remember walking into someone's home back in the 80s and seeing walls made entirely of those thick, shiny glass blocks? They were everywhere. But here's something you might not know. Glass blocks weren't actually an invention of the flashy 1980s. Believe it or not, these decorative pieces first showed up more than a century earlier. Yep, they've been around since the late 1800s, but the 80s breathed fresh life into this once-forgotten style. Suddenly, homeowners discovered how great these blocks could be for creating partitions that let light through but kept spaces feeling private. Kitchens, bathrooms, you name it. People placed these glass bricks in windows, creating that frosted, slightly distorted look that was both stylish and practical. It didn't stop at home decor either. Hollywood quickly jumped on this trend too. Who remembers the iconic comedy film, Look Who's Talking? If you watch closely, you'll spot John Travolta and Kirstie Alley sharing scenes with these glass block walls right behind them. This trend was so popular, it didn't just fade away with shoulder pads and leg warmers. No, it kept right on going, making its way deep into the decor choices of the 90s as well. It's amazing how something so simple became such a memorable hallmark of our homes. Laura Ashley floral bedding. In the 1980s, floral bedding and curtains weren't just popular, they were practically everywhere. If you walked into a girl's bedroom back then, there was a good chance it looked like a garden exploded in there. The queen of this flowery takeover, Laura Ashley. Her delicate, romantic designs were all the rage. Think ruffles, pastels, and dainty rose prints. Feminine to the max. Her collections turned simple bedrooms into cozy, cottage-inspired retreats that looked straight out of a storybook. Laura Ashley's signature style ruled department stores and catalogs throughout the decade. Moms loved it. Teen girls adored it. And yes, if you were dating in the 80s, odds are you sat on one of those beds with the matching floral comforter and curtains. The soft, frilly vibe became a decorating staple, and Hollywood took notice too. Just check out Kim Basinger lounging on a floral bedspread in the 1988 film My Stepmother is an Alien. That bedroom is peak 80s charm, right down to the blooming patterns. While trends have changed, there's something sweet and nostalgic about that old-school floral flair. It was soft, comforting, and unmistakably 80s, bringing a bit of English countryside charm into suburban homes everywhere. Were you team floral or team pastel in your 80s home? Extravagant drapes and lace curtains. If there's one home trend that truly captured the over-the-top spirit of the early 1980s, it was those grand, dramatic drapes. We're talking massive, floor-to-ceiling curtains that swallowed windows whole. These weren't just to block the sun. They were a full-on fashion statement, The fabric was thick, heavy, and often velvety or shiny. And the extras? Oh, they went all out. Ornate tiebacks with tassels, elaborate valances draped across the top. It was like something pulled straight from a royal palace. Except, unlike royalty, you didn't have a team of people to help clean them. And if that wasn't enough, lace curtains were layered right underneath. These delicate sheer fabrics gave windows that extra touch of elegance, or at least that was the idea. Together, the heavy drapes and the light lace formed a power couple of 80s window fashion. And once this trend caught on, there was no stopping it. You saw it everywhere, in suburban homes, TV sitcoms, and even Hollywood films. It became the go-to look, the signature of a well-dressed window. Interestingly, lace curtains weren't born in the 80s. Their roots go way back to early 20th century Europe. But in the 1980s, paired with those extravagant drapes, they created a look that defined an entire decade of interior design. Bold, elegant, and unapologetically excessive. Skirting on furniture. One of the quirkiest trends that marched right out of the 1970s and into the heart of 1980s decor was skirting. No, not the kind you wear. This was skirting for your furniture. Beds, couches, ottomans. They all had to be dressed up in these flowing fabric skirts. It wasn't enough for a piece of furniture to just be functional. It had to look like it was ready for afternoon tea. These skirts weren't subtle either. They were often ruffled, pleated, or floral, and they went all the way to the floor, completely covering the legs of whatever they were wrapped around. At first glance, it might have seemed charming or cozy, but if you lived with them, you knew better. These things were like little monsters lurking over the carpet. They'd swallow up toys, socks, shoes, basically anything small enough to disappear underneath and stay hidden for days. And remember those sleek glass-top tables everyone loved in the 80s? Well, even they eventually got fitted with skirted covers. It was like no piece of furniture was safe. Looking back now, it's hard to say exactly why this look was so popular, but at the time, skirting was seen as elegant and homey. Today, it's more of a fun memory and a reminder that even furniture had to get dressed up in the 80s. Indoor houseplants. If you stepped into a home during the 1980s, chances are you were greeted by a leafy green welcome. Houseplants were everywhere. They weren't just decoration. They were a lifestyle. And while this trend had roots in the 1970s, it absolutely flourished in the 80s. It was like every home tried to outdo the next, transforming living rooms, kitchens, and sunrooms into mini indoor jungles. You'd find spider plants hanging from macrame holders, ferns sprawling across bookshelves, and giant ficus trees standing proudly in corner pots. And it wasn't just about sticking a plant in the window. New homes were being built with sunrooms, garden windows, and indoor patios, custom designed just to make room for more greenery. The trend was about bringing the outside in, and everyone jumped on board. But it didn't stop at real plants. The love for greenery spilled into decor too. Bedding, wallpaper, curtains, even furniture fabrics were covered in leafy patterns and tropical vibes. Palm fronds, jungle vines, and bold botanical prints added that lush, natural touch to every corner of the home. Looking back, it was a beautiful kind of excess. The 80s made houseplants not just an accent, but a central part of home life. Alive, stylish, and always growing. Which of these unforgettable 80s trends did you have in your own home? Tell us your favorites. Lucite furniture. Back in the 1980s, clear furniture was suddenly everywhere, and lucite led the charge. If you walked into a trendy home or office during that time, odds are you spotted a see-through coffee table, or maybe even a lucite chair, sitting proudly in the living room. It looked futuristic, clean, and completely unlike the bulky, dark wood furniture of earlier decades. This wasn't a brand new idea, though. Lucite actually first made waves way back in the Art Deco era of the early 1900s. But the 80s gave it a bold new spotlight. Lucite furniture had this cool, floating look that fit right in with the modern vibes of the decade. It gave rooms an open, airy feel, perfect for making small spaces seem larger. Plus, people loved how it paired with just about anything, from brass accents to neon pops of color. And let's be honest, a clear table had its perks. You couldn't sneak a game of footsie without being caught red-handed or red-footed. Whether it was a sleek end table, a clear dining chair, or a full-on lucite vanity, this transparent trend made a strong statement. Minimalist, stylish, and oh-so 80s, lucite furniture was more than just a fad. It was a design flex. Hollywood vanity lighting. One of the most iconic lighting trends of the 1980s has to be the Hollywood vanity light fixture. You know the one. Those bold rows of oversized globe bulbs that lined the top or sides of a bathroom mirror, making you feel like you were about to step onto a movie set. These lights were all about drama and glamour, and everyone wanted a little piece of that star treatment in their own home. The fixtures themselves were usually set in honey oak wood or coated in shiny brass, because of course it had to match the rest of the house. Each bulb was a powerhouse, cranking out 60 or even 100 watts with zero concern for energy efficiency. Bathrooms lit up like stadiums, and if you squinted, it was easy to believe you were in a dressing room at a Hollywood studio. But with all that brightness came a small issue: makeup. Women would apply their foundation under those blazing bulbs, and sometimes, well, the lighting wasn't exactly forgiving. It could lead to some pretty harsh blending results once you stepped outside into the real world. Still, the Hollywood vanity light wasn't just a fixture. It was a feeling. It made everyday routines feel a bit more glamorous. Over the top? Maybe. But in the 80s, over the top was the whole point. Metal wall sculptures. If you lived through the 1980s, chances are you saw at least one metal wall sculpture hanging proudly in someone's home, maybe even your own. These shiny, often oversized art pieces were all the rage. Whether it was a flock of birds mid-flight, abstract leaves, or swirling flowers, they brought a certain metallic drama to living room and hallway walls across the country. These sculptures were mostly two-dimensional, but had enough texture and shine to give a room that extra wow factor. They were especially popular in newer homes, but even folks in older houses jumped on the trend. Why? Because they made decorating super simple. One big statement piece, and boom, the wall felt finished. It was bold, eye-catching, and fit right in with the rest of the flashy 80s aesthetic. But while they looked good, they came with one not-so-glamorous downside: dusting. Those intricate shapes and open spaces were dust magnets. Cleaning them wasn't just annoying, it was a chore. Still, back then, that didn't stop anyone. These metal masterpieces were symbols of style, a little glimmer of modern art in everyday homes. Looking back, they're a perfect snapshot of a decade that loved to go big or go home, even when it came to wall decor. Pastel wall colors and mauve. In the 1980s, if your walls weren't covered in floral or leafy wallpaper, then chances are they were painted in soft, dreamy pastels. These gentle hues were the go-to choice for homeowners looking to keep up with the times. From baby pinks and powder blues to seafoam greens and lavender purples, pastels ruled the color palette. Some people went all in, painting an entire room in a single soft shade, while others mixed and matched to create subtle contrast. Either way, having pastel walls meant your home was right on trend. And then there was mauve, a color that defined the decade. Mauve was that mysterious shade floating between pink and purple. It wasn't too bright, wasn't too dull, but it had just the right touch of warmth and sophistication. It became the color of the era, much like avocado green dominated the 70s. Mauve found its way into bedrooms, bathrooms, living rooms, and even carpeting. The rise of this muted tone was inspired in part by the famous artist Georgia O'Keeffe. After her death in 1986, her desert-themed works gained renewed popularity. Her paintings, filled with soft pinks and dusky purples, reminded people of sunsets over adobe homes and wide-open landscapes. That desert-inspired vibe helped mauve become the ultimate 80s wall color, quiet, romantic, and unmistakably stylish. Brass fixtures and decor. If there's one material that defined the look of 1980s home decor, it's brass. It was everywhere. And once you let it into your home, it spread like wildfire, kind of like those gremlins from the movies. You'd find brass on everything from wall art to doorknobs, cabinet pulls, light fixtures, floor lamps, candlesticks, and even little decorative animal statues. It had this shiny golden glow that made everything look just a bit fancier, or at least that was the goal back then. Wall sculptures? Probably brass. That lamp in the corner? Definitely brass. And while it looked stylish when new, it didn't stay that way for long. Keeping brass looking good meant regular polishing with brass cleaner, or else it turned dull and spotty in no time. And let's be honest, most of us didn't polish it as often as we should have. To make matters worse, a lot of those pieces weren't even solid brass. They were brass plated, and that shiny finish would wear off, flake, or just plain fall apart after a few years. Still, in the 80s, brass was a symbol of elegance, even if it was a bit of a hassle. Today, it's more of a nostalgic punchline. Walk into an antique store, and you'll see a whole shelf of it, just waiting to be remembered. Entertainment centers. In the 1980s, entertainment centers weren't just furniture, they were the centerpiece of the living room. These things were huge, and they had to be. Why? Because the average 80s household had an entire collection of media to store. Vinyl records, 8 tracks, cassette tapes, beta tapes, VHS tapes, and maybe even a growing pile of Atari games. Even if some of those formats were becoming outdated by the late 80s, no one was quite ready to part with them yet. Everything had a place, and that place was the entertainment center. These massive wooden units were designed with shelves, compartments, and drawers galore, perfect for showing off your stereo system, dual-deck cassette player, VCR, turntable, and those giant speakers that barely fit. If you had one of the fancier models, it probably had glass-paneled doors with those little magnetic latches. You'd hear that distinct click every time you opened it up. And let's not forget, those glass doors were absolute fingerprint magnets, but we didn't care. It looked high-end. The entertainment center was more than storage. It was a badge of honor, a place to showcase your favorite albums, your newest VHS tapes, and every gadget that brought music, movies, and games to life. In the 80s, if your living room had one, you were living the dream. Novelty phones. Back in the 1980s, phones weren't just a way to stay connected. They were a full-blown obsession, especially for teenagers. Sure, there were no apps, no texting, and definitely no social media, but that didn't matter. What made phones fun back then were the extra-long receiver cords you could stretch across the room while chatting with your best friend. You'd wrap that cord around your finger while lying on the bed, doodling in your notebook, and talking for hours, until someone else in the house needed to use the line. But let's talk about the real stars of the show, novelty phones. These weren't your average black or beige wall models. In the 80s, phones came shaped like Garfield the cat, Snoopy lying on his doghouse, or even a giant pair of lips. They were colorful, quirky, and just plain cool. If you didn't have one, you definitely circled a few in the Christmas catalogs from Sears, JCPenney, or Montgomery Ward, hoping Santa or your parents got the hint. And as for privacy, forget about it. You had to hope no one picked up the line in another room or barged in asking when you'd be done. Still, those novelty phones made talking feel like an event. Fun, personal, and very, very 80s. Honey oak cabinets. Ah, honey oak cabinets, the golden glow of the 1980s kitchen. If your home was built during that decade, chances are your kitchen was lined with these shiny, warm-toned wooden cabinets. They were everywhere. Even if your own place didn't have them, you definitely saw them in someone else's house, or maybe on your favorite sitcom. These cabinets were the go-to choice for builders and homeowners alike, giving off that polished, slightly rustic look that just screamed modern back then. At the time, honey oak was considered stylish and practical. It was sturdy, affordable, and gave kitchens a bright, inviting feel. The wood's orange and yellow undertones paired perfectly with the linoleum floors and pastel-colored walls that were all the rage. But much like big hair and acid-washed jeans, this look hasn't exactly aged gracefully. Today, spotting honey oak cabinets instantly takes you back. They're like a time capsule of Aquanet hairspray, neon workout gear, and cassette tapes. While some folks are bringing them back with a modern twist, for many, they're a loud, nostalgic reminder of a bold design era that didn't believe in subtlety. Love 'em or hate 'em, honey oak cabinets are pure 80s gold. Floral patterns. If there's one thing the 1980s didn't hold back on, it was floral patterns. They were absolutely everywhere, and we mean everywhere. It wasn't enough to have a floral bedspread or a pair of matching curtains. No, the 80s went full bloom. You'd find florals on wallpaper, lampshades, and even sofas. Whole living rooms looked like they had been dipped in a garden. The designs ranged from delicate pastel roses to loud, oversized blooms in bold colors. Every room had a hint, or a whole explosion, of floral print. It was cozy, it was charming, and at the time, it was considered peak sophistication. You couldn't flip through a home decor magazine or walk into a furniture store without seeing petals on practically everything. And if you want a visual flashback, just watch any movie or TV show from the 80s. Chances are, there's a scene with a floral couch, a matching wallpaper, and maybe even a coordinating floral lampshade in the background. It was a style choice that said, let's bring the garden indoors, everywhere, all at once. Looking back now, it might feel a little overwhelming, but back then, floral patterns were the ultimate sign of a warm, lived-in home, and they defined the look of the decade. Neon accents. When you think of the 1980s, it's impossible not to picture bright, glowing neon lights, and while they started out on storefronts and arcade signs, by the late 80s, neon had made its way right into people's homes. It wasn't everywhere like wallpaper or curtains, but it definitely made bold appearances, especially in teen bedrooms and more modern spaces. Neon lights became a fun, flashy way to add energy and edge to a room. You'd see glowing squiggles, electric palm trees, or maybe a lightning bolt mounted on the wall, often in hot pink, lime green, or electric blue. It wasn't just about lighting, it was a full-on vibe. Neon brought that Miami Vice, roller rink, rock and roll look right into the house. For younger households, it was a way to stay trendy, cool, and just a little bit rebellious. Even if you didn't have neon art on your wall, you probably saw it in commercials, music videos, or your favorite TV shows. It was flashy, loud, and completely unforgettable, just like the decade itself. Neon was more than a design, trend. It was a symbol of the bold, energetic spirit of the 80s, glowing in every color imaginable. Heart-shaped tubs. Nothing says 1980s romance quite like the heart-shaped tub. These oversized, curvy bathtubs became the ultimate symbol of luxury and love during the decade. Even if you didn't have one in your home, you definitely saw them in hotel commercials, honeymoon suites, or maybe even in a friend's slightly over-the-top bathroom. These tubs weren't just about bathing. They were about making a bold statement. A little cheesy? Maybe. But in the 80s, bigger was always better. The idea actually started back in 1968, when Morris Wilkins, co-owner of the Cove Haven Resort in Lakeville, Pennsylvania, installed the very first heart-shaped tub. It was designed to add a spark to romantic getaways, and it worked. People loved the novelty, and soon the trend spread far beyond that Pennsylvania resort. By the 1980s, these tubs were popping up in homes, resorts, and honeymoon destinations all over the country. They were usually placed in loft areas or master suites, sometimes even surrounded by mirrors or under skylights to really set the mood. Sure, they might feel a little over the top today, but back then, they were seen as luxurious, fun, and totally in style. Heart-shaped tubs weren't just a bathroom fixture, they were an experience. Venetian and vertical blinds. When it comes to 1980s window treatments, Venetian and vertical blinds were absolutely everywhere. Venetian blinds, those classic horizontal slats, were a staple in most homes. But unlike the plastic versions we see today, 80s Venetians were usually made of metal. They looked sleek at first, but if you had pets, kids, or even clumsy adults in the house, you know the struggle. One accidental tug or paw swipe, and those slats would bend out of shape, and once they were bent, they were never the same again. Then there were the vertical blinds, another hot trend of the time. These were especially popular for patio doors or big windows and stretched from ceiling to floor, giving a modern, dramatic look. The idea was great in theory, elegant, simple, easy to open. But in practice, they had their quirks. Floor vents nearby would blow the blinds around like wind chimes, making them rattle constantly and letting in more light than you wanted. And let's not forget how often they broke. Those flimsy plastic hooks didn't stand a chance against everyday wear and tear. Though both types of blinds are still around today in updated forms, the 80s versions were frustratingly fragile. Still, they were part of what gave 80s homes that unmistakable, sleek, modern look, at least until something snapped or bent. What's one iconic 80s decor item you still have, or wish you still had, today? Memphis design. If there's one design trend that perfectly captures the playful, bold spirit of the 1980s, it's Memphis design. And no, despite the name, it didn't come from Tennessee. This wild and colorful aesthetic actually came out of Milan, Italy, thanks to a group of avant-garde designers led by Ettore Sottsass. The story goes that the name Memphis was inspired by Bob Dylan's 1966 album Blonde on Blonde, which was playing during the group's first meeting. Pretty cool origin, right? Memphis design was all about breaking the rules. Instead of sticking to muted colors and clean lines, this style went all out with bright, clashing hues, bold geometric shapes, and squiggly patterns that looked like something out of a kid's dream. You'd see zigzags, polka dots, and color blocks all jumbled together, and somehow it worked. It was fun, funky, and completely unforgettable. If you're having trouble picturing it, just think of the opening credits of Saved by the Bell. That's Memphis design in all its glory, loud, energetic, and unapologetically 80s. It spilled over into the 90s too, especially in pop culture, TV sets, and teen fashion. Love it or laugh at it, Memphis design made a lasting impression that's hard to ignore. Wall-to-wall carpeting. In the 1980s, wall-to-wall carpeting was the gold standard of home comfort. Just about every house, whether brand new or a charming older home, had some room, or every room, blanketed in carpet. And not just any carpet, either. We're talking plush, thick, and cozy underfoot. Hardwood floors, no matter how beautiful, were often completely covered up. If the shag carpet of the 70s didn't get to them first, the 80s definitely finished the job. Carpet was seen as both modern and luxurious at the time. It added warmth, muffled sound, and brought color into the space. And one of the standout shades of the decade? Teal. This deep, rich blue-green was everywhere, in living rooms, bedrooms, even staircases. It gave homes that bold, fashionable edge that people craved in the 80s. Want a visual example? Just rewatch National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation from 1989. That house was peak suburban chic, complete with a plush teal carpet to match. While wall-to-wall carpeting might not be as dominant today, in the 80s, it was a sign that your home was cozy, stylish, and totally on trend. It wrapped every room in softness, and occasionally hid some truly gorgeous hardwood floors underneath. From magical dolls to transforming robots, the 1980s gave us toys that were more than just playthings. They were memories that still bring a smile today. Did we miss your favorite? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this trip down memory lane, check out the rest of our series, subscribe, and share. Who remembers, with someone who loved the 80s too. Thanks for watching.